Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR, presented and brought to you by FanDuel. And we have the Washington transfer portal recap to get to here. Washington still was adding a few more pieces to their transfer portal class, so it was a good thing we waited a little bit on this one. But we have our guy Hooligan here with us from the Sound the Sirens podcast to be talking with us about this Washington transfer portal class. And of course, it would not be a Washington transfer portal recap if we didn't get the scoop on what's going on with Demond Williams as well. So first and foremost, Hooligan, tell people where they can find Sound the Siren and all your other content at.
Yeah, well, certainly, first and foremost, we're at Sound the Siren UW on YouTube. Of course, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find us there. I'm on Twitter at Hooligan7 /_STSUW. We're on Twitter at Sound the Siren UW. We're on Instagram as well. Don't necessarily expect a ton of content from us there. It's an area we'd like to get to, but no promises, so don't be disappointed if you don't see us posting on Instagram regularly. There's not enough hours in the day.
You're not taking pictures of your dinner and your coffee and everything and putting it out there?
No, not. I will occasionally, when I'm on campus or in the stadium, I might post, and with some of the other guys from the show, I might post something. But I don't know. I tend to post a little more to my personal account that's not under my podcast alias. Then, but even then, I'm not like, hey, made a bomb ass dinner, and
I'm with you.
Check out the rain outside, which is 8 months of the year in Seattle. So
yeah. Well, right now, if you look out here, Bloomington, Indiana, it's the snow outside. We just got 13 inches here, so it's not going away anytime soon. The freezing weather's here. So anyway, people did not come here to hear me talk about having to shovel my driveway with 13-inch snow. I could talk about it for a long time if people wanted me to, but what they did come here for was the Washington transfer portal recap. And like I said, I don't think it would be a recap if we didn't mention the Demond Williams situation. Obviously, this is where we kind of need to start with the whole thing. Demond Williams, about I think like a week, maybe less than a week into the transfer portal, gets announced that he wants to go into the transfer portal and make that happen. Well, the drama around it was that he had signed essentially a contract, a deal, whatever you want to call it, with Washington to return. ESPN reported it like 2 or 3 days before, and so everybody's kind of wondering what in the world is going on. News leaks out that Demond Williams, his agent, is the same agent as Jedd Fisch, and so everybody's wondering what's going on there. Does this mean Jedd Fisch is going to the NFL and everything else? I mean, it was all kind of chaos and pandemonia. Obviously, he comes back, and Demond Williams is going to be with Washington next season. There's most likely some tampering going on with, whoever it was. Sounded like it was probably LSU, but, who knows at this point.
LSU could be Miami, any number of places that
whoever needed a quarterback, pretty much. Yeah. So,
yeah.
Holy, give us, did I do a good job of kind of explaining that, and then give us kind of you and the rest of Washington's fan base reaction and kind of where it all sits right now?
Yeah, I certainly think that in the big I've got a multitude of thoughts on the topic, as I'm sure probably won't surprise you, given my own past appearances on shows in our network. But certainly an interesting set of circumstances in that, and I'll start with the macro if I can, at big picture college football. I by no means would I want Washington to be the one to prosecute necessarily to be the program that it happened to. I will say in the macro that Washington enforcing the contract that it had signed with Demond Williams, and being the first example, obviously it didn't go all the way to into the court system, but that they're not just these contracts that these players are signing aren't just tissue paper, that they actually do mean something. And ultimately, I definitely think, there were programs out there that were tampering that brought Demond that prompted Demond to attempt to enter the transfer portal. But that the stipulations for and it's good news for every other program in the Big Ten that uses the same template of contract that Washington uses, that it is enforceable. I think certainly given the circumstances, I think Demond has some some work to do to win back the locker room, to win back some of the, I mean, I think probably he's taken some of those steps now. I'd say he's got still some work to do to win back some of the fan base. I think, I don't know if I want to spend a ton of time talking about it, but the specific circumstance is not about him leaving after signing the contract. Like, yeah, that would have sucked. The thing that really raised the ire, and where I'm of the list of Washington Huskies whose jerseys I will think about buying next year, Damon Williams is pretty far down the list. Not because he tried to leave by any stretch of the imagination, but the fact that he timed the announcement that he was going to try and leave to an exact time when about 75% of his teammates and the majority of the athletic department staff was at a celebration of life for a fellow student athlete that passed away about 6 weeks ago from the women's soccer team. Like, that to me was, and I still get a little fired up about it. It's like, you know what, a day later, okay, Damon, wish you well. I'm sure the contract stipulations and enforcement would have still happened, but that circumstance that's not going to win you a lot of fans. I think there will have to be some significant work done by Damon to win some of the fan base back. Obviously, Washington, from a football perspective, is in a better place with Damon Williams coming back next year than we would have been had he chosen to depart. But it remains to be seen. Damon had a pretty, all things considered, had a pretty damn good year in 2025. Some big game struggles. We could talk about that. We could talk about Damon, and we could talk about Damon and Jedd and this program in terms of big games and not quite getting over that hump yet. But
they did improve, right? I mean, last year, the year before last year, they don't win any road games. This year, they, of course, they lose to Wisconsin, unfortunately, but you do win that comeback game on the road against Maryland. You blow out UCLA on the road, and that one wasn't across the country, but it was still a road game. And
LA is not traditionally super kind to Washington, although we seem, and here's a trend that I definitely hope continues, is that we seem to have for the last decade or so, with one exception, we basically seem to have USC's number. So
yeah, there you go. Let me ask this a little bit, kind of more with the team instead of Damon Williams. So, obviously everything happens with Damon Williams, like you just talked about, and you talked about, kind of needing to win the fan base back. And I totally get that if I were a fan of Washington, and I am kind of pseudo fan, I guess, with how I run a Big Ten podcast. But, I would be the same way. Do you feel like it could impact the season at all for the team? Because Zach and I were talking about it after it happened, and I said, this could impact chemistry. This could impact, teamwork, guys working together. I think if anything, it does work out better because it was, months and months before the season begins. Damon Williams going to have time to kind of make things better with his teammates, and, football players, like, yeah, they might hold a grudge for a little bit, but at the end of the day, you go out there on that field and you go to war together. That creates a brotherhood between you and the guys that a lot of other stuff can't create. So do you feel like it's gonna, negatively impact the season this season at all? Maybe just the beginning, or do you feel like by that time everybody will kind of be over it and Damon will be back to himself?
I mean, I would say that it could. I would say probably the teammates and the coaching staff are going to be the easier, to my mind, are going to be the easier, is an easier win back than the fan base.
Yeah.
For that very reason, that they're in the battles day to day. They see the effort, the things that are happening behind the scenes that the fan base doesn't see, and ultimately the fan base is going to judge it based on what we hear, what we see from Damon, how the team responds to Damon, and ultimately it's what's going to happen on Saturdays next fall.
For sure. And at the end of the day, like
winning isn't the only thing, but winning will bring, winning some big games will soften the fan base quite a bit on, or will reduce the ire that the fan base feels. I still don't think we're ever going to forget that.
Right.
And again, it's not from, I think for the majority of us, it's not about that he tried to leave. I mean, it's the nature of the beast in college football. It's like,
yeah.
Players are going to go to the highest bidder. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm. It was the timing and everything else, and that was one of the first things that I noticed when people were talking about on social media, and like, it's just such a difficult thing to try to process through for fans, and then obviously a difficult decision for Demond Williams. How's he going to do it? I think obviously he realizes now that that was not the correct decision. Just being frank and being honest here, that was a cowardly decision. But we'll see what happens this season and how they'll move on. In addition to Demond Williams being added back to the team through the transfer portal, this team also made some other additions with players into the transfer portal. You got Bodpin Miller here recently through Ohio State. He was a bit of a project this past season, but maybe he has a lot of athleticism. He could come in and possibly be a contributor this year or next year for Washington. Elijah Brown, the quarterback coming in from Stanford, he looks to be kind of the future, it seems like. And it wasn't just there. Christian Moss, some other guys. Who were some of your favorite additions that you think could impact the season the most?
I mean, I certainly I think, probably in terms of the biggest immediate or most obvious contributions, I probably would point, offensively, I'm probably going to point to a couple of guys, and I'd probably say that it's Jaden Lamar with the departure of Adam Muhammad to the transfer portal. Obviously, Washington signed a top 10 running back in the country in Brian Bonner that's coming in. So we saw some really nice things this past season from Jordan Washington, but they're more speed guys. Bonner can be the total package, but I also don't necessarily, in my idea, I'm a little old school in saying, like, I ideally don't want to see a freshman tailback get 25 carries a game and have to be the bell cow. And with Muhammad's departure, we needed somebody like a Jaden Lamar that can take 15 to 20 carries a game. He doesn't necessarily need to be a game breaker. He doesn't need to necessarily be a home run threat, but just take 15, 16 carry touches a game, get us 4.5 yards per for that, and be more and certainly the staff has shown evidence of really having an affinity for having that kind of duo of power and speed. Whether it's in the if they can find it in the same person, great. If not, they'll happily take a bigger tailback and then pair him with a speed guy. There's a couple of guys in the program already that are probably going to play into that mix a little bit as well. So I think Lamar is going to be a key addition, and then certainly, again, it's been an interesting portal class, and I think the tackle that they got from Sam Houston State in Colt Diederich, I think is going to see the field, if not extensively, but be probably a pretty significant part of the rotation. Obviously, you have Drew Party coming back, who took a big step forward in his second season at Washington. Have a very, very highly rated tackle coming in Cody Green. But again, this is just me. I'm a little old school. It's like, if Cody Green earns the job and proves that he's better than anyone on the roster in fall camp and spring camp, great. Mm-hmm. But I want him to earn it. I want there to be competition at that spot. I don't, in my book, basically, I get a little leery of true freshmen on the offensive line unless they're guys named like Orlando Pace or Jonathan Ogden that are like generational one-of-one type players. But having that depth is something that's going to be really, really key, particularly it was something that had a huge impact on Washington in 2025 when Carver's Willis missed a couple of games. We didn't necessarily have that, experienced, ready to go P4 caliber tackle, and our offense bogged it down for a stretch.
Yeah, for sure. And so, you saw John Mills get time last year. So if John Mills can come in, and granted that was a guard, guard starting freshman is a little bit different than tackle there, but
yep.
I would think
go that way. Yeah. some of what it is with guards. I mean, yes, there's pass blocking, but like,
yes. Yeah. I would think with how John Mills performed as a true freshman, there could be some hope for Cody Green to come in and say, hey, highly touted freshman coming in here, very, very highly rated. And I think that's something that not a lot of people realized about this Washington team. in the transfer portal is they didn't have to go out and add as much in the transfer portal because kind of like USC, there's a very good, obviously not, as many players as USC got, but it's not the number one class in the country. But for Washington, this
the top 15 class.
Right, top 15. This was one of the best recruiting classes you guys have ever signed. So you're probably going to see, if not starting, at least playing and contributing from a number of true freshmen this season.
Yep. Yeah, and that's it's going to be it's going to be interesting to see that play out in 2026. For my money, if I would have liked to see us be a little more aggressive in a couple of places. There's places that I have no issues at all with what we did. To flip it over, I certainly think, I think this last season proved both of the adaptability of Coach Walters on, our defensive coordinator, that like the bodies didn't necessarily fit what he ideally wanted to do. And we saw it, partway through the season that he adjusted the scheme and we saw the defense take a big step forward. We didn't go out and sign it. I don't think we, between Kai McClendon or, Darren Conley, I don't think we signed, and Deshaun Watts, I don't think we signed anybody and even Logan George, another Ohio State transfer. I don't know necessarily that we signed any game breakers up front on the defensive line, but in the scheme of things, I don't think we necessarily needed a game breaker to be a successful defense. I think the big question for us going into 2026 and why the addition of Emmanuel Carnley is so important. The staff has recruited very well in the secondary, but it was going to be a very young room outside of Alex McLaughlin and a couple of others. And we, having an experienced guy at corner with the departures of Takario Davis and Ephesians Prysock was going to be really key. And then with going back to wide receiver with the addition of Christian Moss and Bodapen Miller, I think those guys are could get into the rotation. I'm in the camp that we should have gone, and I would have liked to see us swing a little harder for a number one receiver. I think it's a little bit, my take is that we're kind of trying to do a little bit of a Moneyball thing with the departure of Denzel Boston to the NFL draft and replace him in the aggregate. Because there's not anybody on this roster right now that's Denzel Boston.
No, there's not. I do like Christian. I do like Christian Moss. Ohio State was after him for a little bit, so I actually kind of watched a little bit of his film.
And that's not to disrespect anybody.
Right. But you're right.
But
none of them are Denzel Boston.
You're not going to like you're essentially with the transfers and with your freshmen, to some extent, you're playing roulette that one of those guys becomes Denzel Boston. You're not saying, okay, I'm playing blackjack and I've got 15. Am I going to hit on that? Or am I going to, obviously you probably should hit on that, but you've got a better chance with 15 than with playing roulette.
True.
Poor gambling metaphor, but you get where I'm going.
I get it. So you mentioned, the departure of Denzel Boston. Obviously, the transfer portal, as much as he gives, it also takes away. Denzel Boston went to the NFL draft, but Washington did lose a few guys. Adam Muhammad was one that you mentioned. He was a guy I was pretty high on in the offseason. Just continued to hear the hype about him, and then I saw him during the season, kind of in relief of Jonah Coleman, and thought, man, this guy, he has it. He's going to be a really good back. He transfers out. You bring in, like you said, Jaden Lamar. You're going to have the true freshman coming in as well. Do you feel like Washington did a good job of replacing the departures from the transfer portal? If so, who are some of those guys that maybe stunk to lose, but you felt like you replaced them well?
Yeah, I don't have... For me, my concern is not necessarily the guys that we lost to the portal, to the extent, I think Adam Muhammad was certainly the most proven of that. But honestly, he had a really strong, 2-game stretch to close the year, but it wasn't a game-breaking year by any stretch in the imagination. Be like that, this is truly an irreplaceable piece of what we have. I certainly had a couple of the receivers that left, in particular Raiden Vines-Bright, if you go back to the Sound the Siren recruiting show, was a guy that I was really, really high on, but didn't necessarily show as much on the field this past season as I would have thought. Dealt with some injuries, but still, even when he was on the field and healthy, was not necessarily what I expected there. And I think, in terms of the line, like, looking at who departed, via the portal, we lost some linemen on the defensive line. I think that those guys have probably been pretty adequately replaced by the guys that we brought in. From a macro, the one concern that I have with the departure of Dominic McCone and Caleb Smith, ultimately we have one interior defensive lineman left in the program from that recruiting class. Yes, with the transfer portal, you can probably easier replace them, but you can't whiff on interior D-line year over year and have that be a great situation. Certainly, another one that I was kind of disappointed to see us lose is Paki Fina, who ended up with BYU, was a recruit that, coming in as a recruit I really liked. But other than that, I think we've got fairly adequate replacements either coming via the portal or in-house, whether it's the guys on the team already or coming in this new in that highly regarded freshman class that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what this freshman class does. Probably more excited with them and what they can possibly do than I am. So the transfer portal class, and that's no disrespect for the transfer portal class. I know how excited everybody is and how much effort.
There's more high end athletes, highly
right.
Guys that honestly that other P4 programs were hard and heavy, were hard after, and I don't necessarily think that was always the case with some of the guys that we got in the transfer portal, but here we are. And I will say, I don't necessarily, in terms of Elijah Brown, I don't think he's the heir apparent to DeMond Williams. I think it's a situation he could be, but I don't think it's a situation where it's somebody that's been in college a couple of years and it's just having another, again, DeMond Williams goes down. There's still not a ton of experience, college experience on the roster. He could factor into that. Honestly, I probably, if it was my decision, obviously I have no visibility into how much he's picked up of the, of the offense in the 28 days he's been on campus, as one of the early enrollees. But if DeMond Williams were to go down, I probably would, if it was my choice, I'd say, okay, turn it over to Derek Zammit, quarterback that we got out of New Jersey in this class. But
yeah, I could see that.
But it's not no, very few programs in college football have we're gonna lose our starting quarterback, and whoever's behind him is going to be 80% of that. Very few programs are going to have that level of comfort,
especially in today's day and age when quarterbacks are making $3, $4, $5, $6 million, however much it is. So, all right, a lot of good information in this recap here. Hooligan, really appreciate you coming on. Was there anything additional you want to mention about the Washington transfer portal before we get out of here?
Nope. I think Phil, like I said, filled a lot of holes. I think honestly, one of the other ones that's going to have a big impact that I didn't mention was certainly addressed some, with two kickers and a punter that, in the transfer, Hunter Green, I believe, from San Diego State. That was that transfer announcement was music to Husky fans' ears. We've struggled a little bit in the punting game the last couple of years, and bringing in somebody that not only is a Husky legacy but also averaged 47.7 a punt, something we're really happy about. It's hey, we can actually play some Big Ten ball now.
Punting is winning. Just ask Iowa. They exactly. Kind of started that. So congratulations, Iowa. All right. Great stuff here. Everybody go check out Sound the Siren, Hooligans podcast. A bunch of other, good people over there doing a great job with covering Washington football and everything else. So go check them out. Really appreciate you coming on, Hooligan, and we'll see everybody. Yeah, for sure. Do remind you that we do have every single team we're doing a transfer portal recap for. So we only have 3 left, I think, at this point: Nebraska, Maryland, and Purdue. So go check out the playlist. You can find all the teams over there. Other than those 3, the recap's being done. I got Nebraska lined up for next week, Purdue and Maryland as well. So we'll get those ones done next week. But like I said, Hooligan, appreciate you coming on. And everybody else, thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. Have a good one.
Thanks, Jared.
See you next time.